the way they've got that set up is the agenda and the attachments will stay up in here. He'll have the live stuff or in the other rooms and around, so. Yes. Yep.
Does it look like, since we can't see those?
Well, those are the agendas.
We got the agenda in front of us down there. But
Make sure he's up.
Yours is a lot further.
I think the mic is muted.
Could be a problem.
If you have an extra one, I'll take one. Thank you. I can make notes on it as I go. Okay.
It's helpful. All right then, very good. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Railroad Transportation Safety District meeting for Tuesday, March 2nd. I will call the meeting to order. This meeting of the City of Lincoln, Lancaster County Railroad Transportation Safety District, commonly referred to as the RTSD, is subject to and adheres to the Nebraska Open Meetings Act. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is available for inspection and is posted by the entrance to this room. The RTSD agenda and all the materials that are being considered at today's meeting were posted on the RTSD website on February 23rd, 2021. The RTSD website is also accessible by links from both the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County's official government sites. In addition, on February 23rd, 2021, the meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board located in the City Hall, first floor, 555 South 10th Street. A copy of the agenda is also available at the entrance to this room. One copy of the meeting's agenda and all the materials being considered today are located at the dais, and complete copies of these materials are on file at the RTSD office at 949 West Ballin Street, Suite 200. We will move on to item number 3, the approval of minutes.
Move approval.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Edmondson? Yes. Bowers?
Yes.
Christensen?
yes,
Rabel?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
Yes. Motion to approve passes 6-0. The next item, report of statement of financial activity. Mr. Rohde, good to have you with us.
Well, good to be here. Thank you, Commissioner Vest. And I'm Ron Rohde from the Lancaster County Budget and Fiscal Office. And I'm here to present the quarterly financial statement for RTSD. These figures are as of February 19th, 2021. It gives us ample opportunity to put this together by having that stoppage date. Again, this is broken into the 3 sections below as in the past. The first section is receipts. Second section is disbursements, and the third section is cash and investments. It's always good to note right now that as of February 19th, 2021, we had 64% of the fiscal year elapsed for RTSD. All right, first section, receipts. We have a budget of $5,050,000. We've received $2,099,519. As of February 19th, that's 42%. The second item is a miscellaneous item. I've been speaking with Chairman Feigart about this, and this was kind of an unexpected item. It's Lincoln on the Move. It was a receipt of $151,766. We put it in this category. We didn't know about this at the time last year, so we were not able to budget for it, but we will budget for it in fiscal year 22 that's coming up. Investment interest, we are now at $108,327 actual on a budget of $60,000. We're probably a little bit conservative on that estimate. So we're at 181% collected on the investment interest. Total receipts of $2,359,612 on a budget of $5,110,000. That's our annual budget, so we're 46% of total receipts. as of February 19th. The second section is disbursements. Commissions refunds to state of Nebraska were at $39,312 on a budget of $116,000, which represented 34%. Operating costs were at $26,536,000 on a budget of $104,200, which is 25%. Construction project costs were at $676,529 on an annual budget of $5,865,000, which is 12%. Overall, for disbursements, we're at $742,377 on a budget of $6,085,200, or 12%. The final section, I also want to note on that disbursement section, a little kudos to Chairman Feigard, Commissioner Vest. Chairman Feigard has introduced a software which allows him to review and approve the disbursements electronically. So in this time during the pandemic, that's been more efficient, and appreciate everybody's efforts, including Commissioner Vest, on getting those disbursements made through efficiently. The third section is cash and investments. Bank balance, which is basically cash, we're at $1.1 million. I had some conversation, Chairman Vigard and I, with the Lancaster County Treasurer. They're moving some of those monies into the CDs, so keep that in mind. Total investment balance is $11,378,431. Total fund balance is $12,482,768. The remaining section is just a breakdown of the investments. I know Jane Rabel from the City Council had a good question from the last quarter, and so I went ahead and broke this down. Of the $11,378,431, $4.3 million is in CDs. $7.0 million roughly is in the money market. If you go up to the top under the receipts, investment interest, it's kind of an interesting take on the interest. 88,000 or 81% is from the CD interest, and then 20,000 roughly is from the money market interest. And as I said earlier, the Lancaster County Treasurer is look at moving more into CDs for that section. That ends the financial statements for that quarter, period ending February 19, 2021. Any questions?
Any questions for Ron? Seeing none, do we approve this then, Roger? We would need a motion to approve.
I
So
will.
moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the statement of financial activity. Please call the roll.
Okay, Bowers,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Rabel,
Yes.
Short,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
and Hendrickson.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Moving on to item 6, report regarding current budget status. Roger.
And with the, good morning, Roger Feigard. With the board's permission, I'll really try to cover both items 5 and 6 together. The document that's on the screen at the far right shows the proposed or a draft budget that we would be looking at in June. The middle columns in there for FY21 actuals, Ron has gone through the expenses. We're right on track, about 51% spent. The remainder of the superintendent services will come through, so I think we're going to be right on track with budget there. There's no issues that concern me. So far, and moving down into the well, I'll just cover this side by side. So in the operating budget, which is the upper portion, I will be proposing for your consideration in June, increasing the superintendent services $1,000. You can see that the 50% paid out thus far, 24.8, will exceed the 49,000 if that's similar next year. So I increased that slightly. There really was not, proposing to increase the auditing and accounting $100. That will match and correspond with the proposed auditing, budgeting contract that is before you later today. So a very slight increase from from last year proposed for the upcoming year in the operations. In the capital portion, going on down, that first category there is the crossings. We've only spent $47,000, but we still have a number of commitments out to the railroad for improvements that have been done and not yet paid for. I would propose next year to continue to perpetuate that budget in the same amounts, $250 for city, $50,000 for the county, for a total of $300. The only real expenditure to date in the rest of the capital projects has been the $645,552 for 33rd and Cornhusker, and I would expect that over the course between now and the end of June, there'd be another $300,000 or $400,000 continued to be spent on that contract. No other expenditure. We will have, we'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit, but the Hickman Quiet Zone, $15,000, that probably gets paid out before the end of the fiscal year. Then we had some other dollars in this year's budget for Salt Creek Levee, Salt Creek Underpass, Hastings Sub relocation, and West Woodstruck. In the proposed budget, I am not proposing any money in any of those categories, and I'll tell you why in a little bit, other than the consideration of the Salt Creek Underpass. Currently, the RTSD does have an interlocal agreement with the Lower Platte South NRD to give them to cost share $50,000 for that undercrossing of the trail on the east side of Salt Creek, that just on the east end of Hobson Yard, west of J Street. That's probably one of the last important undercrossings in that trail system, but that project has been on the books for more than 5 years. The current interlocal agreement expires in September with a 5-year termination date. The NRD is still desiring support from the RTSD, and I would propose to have the NRD here at the June meeting to go over and share what that project is and what their budget request would be, whether if it's something different than the $50,000. So that's the only reason I showed that over in the proposed budget, is for that discussion. Correspondingly then, this sheet is what I call the 12-year CIP, and what you would see on that proposing is continuing our regular project activity, the crossings, emergency and safety, and miscellaneous engineering study. But then the only project proposed in this entire listing is 33rd and Cornhusker. I probably should have mentioned back on the other sheet, if you'll notice, this year we had budgeted $5.1 million for 33rd and Cornhusker. And in the past, we tried to kind of make sure that the budget always had as much money as we were contracted for. But in reality, we really need to operate on more of a cash flow basis. So I'm proposing next year, as 33rd and Cornhusker moves ahead, we probably only pay out another $1 million as we're continuing the environmental study. So I don't want to overstate a budget and then have to carry the money over. So I've reduced that over what it would have been typically in the past. But now if we go to the next page, so that $1 million is in 21-22, 22-23 we need $2.5 million, 23-24 $10 million. We get started buying right-of-way and getting ready to go to construction. 24-25 is $7.5, then $20 million, $29 million, $8 million, and $1 million done out in the 28-29 period. The dollars shown on this sheet are intended to be what I think needs to come from the RTSD. Those aren't the total costs of the project. I have factored in and subtracted out an anticipated or an estimated $6 million from the railroad and $25 million coming from the state. That doesn't mean that isn't all we'll ask for, but I just want people to, if you look at those numbers and add them up, that isn't the project cost. That's what I think the RTSD would need to pay. And probably the reason that it's important, there's a couple things going on. That's not what I wanted to call up. As we look forward, this is a cash flow document. And if you'll notice on the far left in the dark green, our current levy is 1.4717. What I've done is I've gone in and said, if we just perpetuate that cash flow on out into the future, and I reduced the capital expenditures to what was on that 12-year sheet, in year 25, we jump to 13 million in the hole, and we go all the way up to 40 million in the hole. So the point simply is, if 33rd and Cornhusker is going to continue, the levy can't stay at 1.4.
Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
Richard, I was trying to figure out, where is the Lincoln on the Move funds? Where do they come in on? I'm guessing they come in on the receipts, but I'm not sure.
That was the 151,000. The city LTU,
Okay.
the RTS by interlocal agreement is to receive approximately 1.5% of those revenues. LTU is collecting those on a monthly basis, and at the end of their fiscal year, they calculate that and they transferred. So that is the money that was collected starting in December of 19 through August 31st of 2020. So that is the RTSD share that is then also to be spent or to be used to help pay for the engineering at 33rd and Cornhusker.
Okay, and then I know that, are you continuing to include you said next year you're going to put a placeholder in for that, correct?
Ron?
Yeah, we'll figure out exactly how to do that. It's not an earth-shattering number.
No.
It's a couple $100,000 a year. It's not a deal breaker one way or the other, but we will continue to show that and make sure that it comes in, gets tracked, audited, and is accounted back to 33rd and Cornhusker.
Great, thank
So
you.
then I also ran a cash flow by moving the levy all the way to 2.6 starting in the new fiscal year. And that is the spreadsheet that I now have in front of you. You see there's still some red numbers. They move back a couple of years, but they never go more than about 18 to $20 million. That's not great, but I think that's a number in which it's realistic for the RTSD to think between asking for additional contributions from NDOT, from their high hazard train money, federal aid, and going for a grant. It's pretty easy for me to think if we qualified for a grant, that is an amount of money that you could expect to receive and cover it. So these are not exact numbers and they're not perfect, but they are to show you if we stay at 147, you're not going to do the project or delay it extensively. If we go to 2.6, if we could get there, I think there is a reasonable chance to continue to keep the project on track and move ahead. But again, that means that's the only project to speak of in the CIP. And the RTSD has always kind of done one big project at a time. I just wanted you thinking about that. The other thing that I think is of concern, and I know the county commissioners are looking and thinking about it right now too, is there are several bills in the legislature this year that potentially could limit or would limit property tax revenue increases for political subdivisions to 3%, effective January 1 of 22. So if that passes, you would be, and I'll just use an example, if that would happen to pass and then the county valuation went up 5%, you'd actually have to lower your levy 2% to get back down. So I think I am saying, as we're looking ahead, my encouragement, and I guess my hope for the RTSD would be, and with the county board, is that we can try to get the levy back up where it is, because that base that you go into in 22 is what you're gonna have to work on, up and down from, depending on whether or not the legislature would pass a property tax limiting bill. So those are things to be thinking about between now and June as we're working on those issues. Not exact science, it's doable, but it's gonna take some work on our part to do that. So that is an overview of where we are. We're fine budget-wise right now, and that's a draft proposal. Again, there's nothing to approve today, but I certainly would answer any questions or try to answer any questions you might have along those lines, or any questions at all on
Go ahead,
finance.
Deb.
Just got one, let's see, I'm looking at the CIP.
Yes?
On there, you've listed South Beltway Railroad crossings, but no dollar amount for the coming year.
That's simply on there because on the previous sheet, in the previous years of 17 and 18, it showed what we spent. There is no more additional proposed revenue or request that I'm aware of for the South Beltway.
Okay.
That'll drop off.
Okay, and then that would be the same explanation then for OPPD and Southwest 84th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote that down in red ink, Roger, when you said we were
Yep, no more.
completed our obligation to the South Beltway.
We're going to send it to
Good.
the state too, make sure. you know.
Good that you repeated that today, I appreciate that. Okay, any
Any other
other?
questions on?
Yes, Jane?
Roger, could you go over again when we need to have a final draft budget or final budget submitted?
Oh, at the June meeting, I will present to you a proposed budget, and you would vote in June to approve a budget, and you would request a levy of the county board. And then in the September meeting, there's always a revote or a reaffirmation of the actual budget forms that have to go to the state auditor, and if there's any required changes based on what the county board has done with their levy and whether that has an effect on the budget that was proposed. If the budget proposed that you approve in June isn't doable based on the information or the levy set by the county board, then we need to revise it. So June and then September.
Thank you.
Good question, thank you. All right, I don't see any further questions for those items.
Okay?
That would put us on to item 8, Roger, consideration of audit and budget contract.
Yes, and Tony Jarina from HBE is here. I would ask him to come up. Again, a reminder, this is not just a budget, it's doing the audit as well as the budget. And as I said earlier, the fee in here is $100 more than it was last year. Tony, thank you.
Good
for
morning.
being here.
I'm Tony Jarina from HBE, and it's been a pleasure working with the RTSD over the years, performing their audit and their budget. And I like to have that, this relationship continue. So we have presented a budget proposal for the audit and the budget. And as Roger said, our fee for this year is $13,200 for both services together, and it is only $100 higher than the previous year, because I heard your concerns last year, and instead of our usual, like $500 or so, or 4% increase, we kept it at $100. So I hope that you'll consider that, and thank you very much for for my ability to come up here and ask for another continuation of this agreement.
Very good. So any questions for Tony? Anybody here? We will need a motion, Roger, to
Yes, my
continue
and
this.
I just wanted to echo,
Okay.
I appreciate Tony and his firm. They've done a good job. They're responsive, available, and highly recommend continuing this. So yes, we need a motion to approve this contract.
I would move that.
Well,
That's okay.
I had Roy.
It doesn't matter who does it.
Okay, Roma, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Roy's
Yeah,
deferring.
I would move that we approve the audit and budget contract for HB.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this contract for the audit. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Christensen,
Yes.
Riggle,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
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 Motion carries 6-0. Thank you, Tony. We
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Number 9, consideration of legal contract.
I hope that's 8.
I think it's 8.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
I'm
Bill Kudelik from
outdated.
Crosby Gunzel is here again. I've really appreciated Bill. I would say this contract continues the same rates. There's a $600 retainer for attending the meetings and just a general overview, and then a highly discounted partner and associate rate that has continued. So with that, I turn it over to Bill.
Certainly. Bill Kudelek, Crosby Gunzel Law Firm, 134 South 13th Street. Appreciate the opportunity to assist the RTSD. Again, as Roger indicated, this contract for the next fiscal year is at the same rates as the last year. And it's a simple contract that we've had for years, terminable by either party upon 30 days' notice. And so with that, I'd offer any questions, but again, appreciate the
Any
opportunity.
questions for Bill?
I will move approval of the legal contract.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the legal contract. Please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Bill, thank you for being here.
Okay, we'll move into, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. We'll move into item number 9, report of project and
Efficiency.
crossing updates. Item A, we're fortunate to have Chris Humphrey here to talk about 33rd and Cornhusker.
You don't have a computer or anything, do you?
No,
Okay.
I don't.
All right.
Good morning, everybody. I don't have anything major to report over the last 3 months. I'll say we've been pretty much doing standard engineering work items. We are still coordinating pretty heavily with the Corps of Engineers Dead Man's Run project, and Olson is progressing towards the 60% plans submittal that will be here in a couple months. With that, we'll also have the environmental submittal, and then if all the reviews stay on schedule, we'll have a public hearing later this year, early next year, and then proceed into final design after the approval of the environmental document and on to construction. So,
Okay.
but with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have in regards to anything with the project.
Let me start. Chris, first, thank you for being here with us. Did I hear accurately that at this point we're on pace to start construction in 23, 24? Is that the plan?
That will be about when final design plans will be complete, and then we'll have right-of-way acquisitions. Currently, the project's scheduled for construction in 2026, dependent on the funding
2020?
and the keeping on the schedule.
All the other
So
requirements.
2026.
Okay. And about how long would it take to construct?
It will probably be a pretty heavy 2 years, probably rolling into a third year for construction. We don't have the phasing all lined out, but there's some pretty significant construction in there with Cornhusker Highway and then the realignment of 33rd and the bridge over the railroad tracks.
Yeah. It's safe to say this is just a massive undertaking with all the work that has to be done up front, in addition to all the changes that are going to take place when construction begins.
Yes, there's a lot of construction that will be happening in this part of Lincoln, starting with the Dead Man's Run project. So as we get closer to it and we have a good handle on the schedule and the phasing, we'll obviously be going back out to the public. A lot of that will start to happen at the public hearing that we'll have with the, after the environmental document is through reviews from the RTSD, Nebraska Department of Transportation, and Federal Highway Administration.
And this may be old information to some, but this is because of those crossings that are so heavily trafficked by both trains and automobiles. There's some ratio, I believe, that they use to evaluate the risk at crossings?
Right, when we look at the evaluation of the risk of the crossings, we take the number of vehicles that cross the tracks every day and multiply that by the number of trains. And that exposure rating for the 33rd and Adams Street combined is over 1 million now, 1.2 million. And just to put that in context, whenever we talk with the state about funding for a railroad overpass, that number needs to be above 50,000. So, but this is pretty significant. It's one of the highest exposure ratings in the whole state of Nebraska. So I always like to remind people this is not only something that the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County is looking at, but it's also something that's important for the whole state in regards to safety at railroad crossings.
Very good. All right. Any other questions for Chris this morning?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
Next up is the Hickman Quiet Zone update for the agreement.
Okay, Roger Figert again. The board authorized the president and the executive director to enter into certain small contract agreements, less than $50,000 if there was budget there, and there were several other conditions in there as well. And as a requirement of that board order, if we enter into a contract with somebody that meets those criteria, we're supposed to report back to the full board at the next meeting. So the attachment in here is an engineering agreement with FHU, who did the original quiet zone implementation in Hickman. And we've already started. We had a kickoff meeting about 2 weeks ago. This quiet zone reevaluation probably should have been done last fall, periodic 5 years, and I think this one was implemented in November of 2015. So Rick and I worked on this. The project is moving ahead, and we had budgeted $15,000, and now don't know why I don't find the number. It's less than that. 12 maybe? Okay. So pleased with that. FHU will do a good job, and we are coordinating with the interim clerk in Hickman.
She has been appointed. She is now the city administrator.
Awesome. I look forward to working with her. I worked with her before on the previous quiet zone. So we will continue, and the goal certainly would be that by the end of March, perhaps, we'd have that paperwork done and sent back to Federal Rail Authority. So again, no action required, just want to report the actions that are authorized by the board for the president and myself to do that.
Okay. Item C then, consideration of financial requests. Roger, go ahead.
Okay, we do have several of those. If you'll remember, a year ago, Operation Lifesaver, the Nebraska section, asked for the RTSD to help sponsor part of their operating costs. And the attachment is an invoice for $300 for this upcoming year. I would say the extra efforts that Operation Lifesaver did over the fall, helping BNSF and OPPD with the cards, the letters, the billboards that were out there to help remind people that trains were going to start running was well worth this $300. I think it's a good thing to do, and would ask the board for their consideration of paying that invoice to Operation Lifesaver. That would just come out of the operating budget.
Okay, do we need a motion at this time to?
Yes, I would ask for a motion for the board to authorize the payment of that invoice.
I would just say this organization is a lot of volunteer folks who are deeply committed to keeping people safe around railroad tracks, and we got way more than $300 worth of value just reopening the line. So I would entertain a motion here.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to approve the Operation Lifesaver. Please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you. Next item, Roger.
Okay, city railroad barricading. If you'll remember when BNSF announced that the trains were gonna start running, there was kind of a mad scramble on updating some crossings, replacing railroad ties, doing some work. Well, Pioneers Boulevard, right off to the west of Highway 2 is one of the intersections that completely got rebuilt. BNSF could have asked the RTSD for a cost share on that. They did not. I know that they spent in the neighborhood of $100,000 in taking out 2 sets of tracks and gears, putting back in 1 set, pouring all of that back in with concrete. And the city, and of course that required a major detour of traffic, and traffic actually needed to go out onto Highway 77 and the west bypass. The city provided barricading and help to the railroad for doing that. And the city is asking for our consideration to reimburse the city $681.50 for the barricade costs from all roads. LTU didn't have enough signs and markings to do some of that, so they used the private company. So this was work done last fall. It would be the kind of cost that we would have shared in had we done an agreement with the railroad to fix the crossing. So city's been very congenial in helping the railroad as well as the railroad helping them. So I told them that I would bring this invoice here and ask for the board's consideration to pay that also.
I would move approval.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the reimbursement of the city of Lincoln $681.50. Please call the roll. Yes.
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 Motion carries 6-0. Next item, 3.
Thank you very much. I think actually what I should do is take 3 and 4 out of order and ask Larry Legg from the county to come up, because I think some of the work the county's proposing to do is better explained, and then I'll come back to 134. So the attachment was a proposed or a draft engineering agreement between the county and FHU to do an engineering and analysis of some intersections, and the county was asking whether or not the board might consider paying for that engineering study up front. This isn't asking to pay for improvements done. That might come later, but just to pay for that engineering study. And I don't remember, Larry, why don't you take from there, explain what work you're proposing to have done and the cost.
Okay, and you know, I'm going to do a little bit more than that. Morning, by the way, Larry Legg, Assistant County Engineer for Lancaster County. When OPPD first started on this, activating the line down in Nebraska City, Roger and I and my design engineer went out and we did a site visit to the 10 crossings that are in the southeast portion of Lancaster County. Looking at that, you know, with an inactive line, there's a lot of issues out there that we looked at. Most of them aren't very necessarily too serious, but there were 2 sites that concerned us. That was the crossing or the intersection with the railroad, or crossing at 134th and at 190th. You know, both of those have some side obstructions that were more permanent. They were buildings that we need to kind of address. So we contracted, or are in the process of contracting with FHU to do a detailed engineering study and make some recommendations and analysis at those 2 sites. In addition, there were 5 other sites that they're going to do some field reviews and then maybe make some suggestions and see if we may want to study it a little bit more in depth. So if you're doing the math, that adds up to 7 of the 10. The other 3 are probably going to be affected with the Lincoln South Beltway, so we need to let the construction finish with that before we go through and do any in-depth analysis on those. So from our field visits, we looked at it and decided we needed to adjust our signage a little bit for the warning signs on the approaches to the crossings. And then at 134th and at 120th, we decided to install barricades with temporary signs up and some flags to really alert people that, hey, there's a railroad crossing. We put yield ahead sign up on the barricade, and then an indication or a placard underneath that indicates that there are no gates or lights. So, maybe people will pay a little bit better attention on those 2 intersections. They're a little bit higher traffic. Now, the 2 intersections we want to study are 134th and 190th. That's what this agreement actually deals with. Ask FHU because when you start getting into railroad crossing and intersection and signage and treatments, that's a little bit of a specialty. It's not general civil engineering. And it's a little bit outside my area of expertise, so we wanted to hire the experts to come in and actually get us a good product and get us something that we can work with. The cost to do the intersection analysis on the 2 crossings, and then site visits and field review of the other 5 is $12,300, as is in your attachment. And I guess I would ask the board's consideration to fund this analysis study, if at all possible.
Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
A question, and maybe this is information you have, or maybe it'll be part of the study. I would like to see average daily traffic counts on each of these. I'm just curious as to how quickly the traffic drops out as we move east or not.
Okay,
So-
I can sure get that information to you.
Okay.
I don't have it off the top of my head.
off the top of your head.
But
So
we do have that. We take, I think the most, well, obviously, we didn't do traffic count last year because it would have not been correct because of the changed traffic patterns. But we do have traffic counts, and I can sure get those for those
I would
crossings in that area.
for the whole list. Thank you.
Any other questions? I forgot to ask for that.
Well, yeah, 100, Jane, did you?
I have a question, but go ahead.
Oh, I'll go first. I won't be long, I don't think. 134th, I went out there because of the attention that crossing's been getting. And I just want to say, I think the barricades was a good move there because if you don't know it's coming, you come up on the crossing fairly quickly. So the barricades alert motorists, especially given that territory where people may not, maybe coming from outside our area. That was a good move, and I appreciate that. So the study would mostly focus on 134th and 190th, but you put barricades at 120th and 134th. Did I?
Yes, we did. And 120th obviously is our higher traffic volume crossing. It's one of our paved routes. So we wanted to, and I'm going to try to say the word, increase the conspicuity of the crossings. That's what the barricades and the flags on them, if the flags stay. Of course, in Nebraska, windy days, that's not always something that's going to happen, is they stay there.
And then the consequence of the study, Larry, would be what is the most appropriate signage warning at those crossings?
That is correct. FHU is Felsberg, Holt, and Ulvig is a pretty progressive engineering company, and they have already proposed some ideas that I find interesting. Maybe we'll see if it's appropriate for it, but something along the lines to grab people's attention a little bit more when you come to those, other than just your signs. That's the problem with signs is people start ignoring them after a while. You see so many signs, and then you just say, oh yeah, it's another sign. Well, we are going to look at adjusting the signage at all the crossings. So you're going to see that come across here pretty soon. We're working on that. Just the spacing and what the signs say, and then maybe put some pressure signs up so we don't have any reflectivity problems with them. But then this would be Appropriate. Now, the traffic volumes aren't high, and if I believe correct, it's like 6 trains a week, Roger, was that what they were doing? So it would be 12 trips in the neighborhood. So, you heard Chris Humphrey talk about 1.2 million conflicts. We're not gonna have anything close to that, and really the warrants, the reasons aren't there for active signs or lights or crossings. But we wanna look at what should be done there, and then, that is a specialty, as I said.
Great explanation, thank you. Jane?
Yeah, Larry, thank you for coming down. So help me understand, what precipitated the need for this review? Was there like some additional accidents or additional traffic, or
No,
what was it, what necessitated
Yeah,
us
I
to?
understand your question.
Yeah.
We haven't had any crashes at these locations, thankfully. The traffic, really, it's just the railroad line going active. And then these 2 particular locations, there's no easy way to clear what you would call the site triangle. I mean, we can cut down trees. It doesn't make people happy, but we can cut down trees if we have to, and that's relatively easy. But both of these, 190th and 134th, have buildings, houses, grain bins that obstruct that site triangle. So we want to take a look at that. And anytime we put up signs, especially change signs, you really need to have a good engineering study to do that, because failing to do your engineering properly can expose you to liability. And, we don't want to do that. Putting up the wrong sign can be worse than not putting up any sign at all.
Jane, I might add, when the announcement was made that the trains were going to start running again, the railroads, the city, the county, and the RTSD, one of the commitments made was to analyze and look at every single crossing and make sure that the appropriate signage, markings, and safety equipment were in place. And this is the county's continuation of that and the ability to complete some of that. The city has done most of theirs.
Okay, and I thought, Roger, it was the obligation of the railroad to take on these upgrades and improvements, no?
Well, stop signs and yield signs, markings, all of those things by state operating rules belong to the road authority. The railroad would be responsible for crossbucks, the emergency number signs that are there. If there was a required upgrade to their own signals and some of that kind of equipment, yes, but the approach roadways and that stuff rest with the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, thank you. And did you?
I just wanted to make a comment about the 134th crossing. We've got the Isaac Walton League out there. There's a lot of traffic along the road because of the Isaac Walton. Also, there are some trees around. There's a lot of residential. And then there is a residential road that breaks off of 134th and then goes into that. There's kind of a strip of residences there. So it's actually really a pretty busy road.
And we did receive a letter from the folks who run Isaac Walton expressing their concern, because as we spoke to earlier, they have folks coming from a lot of different locations to their events. So that's one of the drivers here as well. Deb?
I will make a motion that we approve the request for, was it 13,200 or is it 2,000? 12,000. Yeah, 12,000. Yeah, $12,300, request from the county for a study of said crossings by FHU.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carries 6-0. Roger?
Okay, thank you very much. So then, jumping back one number to number 3, city variable message signs at South 134th. I do actually have Google Earth up, and I have the intersection of 134th Street. And this really boils down to me making a judgment that I thought we needed to do some extra protection and for safety at 134th Street. We were receiving the communications from Isaac Walton, and I don't know whether a lot of folks know, I have to admit I don't, that a number of the high schools around town have trap shooting teams, and they drive out there. And so in the, in the time while the county was kind of trying to get out and look at the intersections, and before they actually put up the additional barricades and the advanced warning for the additional yield sign, the county doesn't have variable message signs, and to rent them, they're $100 to $120 a day per sign if you rent them. The city did have some extras, and I asked the city to go out and put up 2 variable message signs that it varied back and forth between one southbound and the other one northbound part of the time. And my goal was to make sure that anybody driving up and down 134th was reminded the trains were going to start running. I just felt that that was a primary mission of the RTSD, and heaven forbid that anyone would get hurt out there. So, and then, so those signs have been out there, the cold weather and whatnot, the county, it took them a while to get their barricades out there, but the variable message signs are there now. Well, additionally, the Isaac Walton has 3 scheduled shoot meets coming up, March 12th, April 3rd, and April 24th. And they come in and they practice on Fridays, they shoot on Saturdays, and then they go home. So I am suggesting, and these aren't just local kids, these will be teams and schools coming from out of state and other places that wouldn't be necessarily familiar with the area. So I am recommending and asking the RTSD to reimburse the city to put up 2 signs starting on a Thursday afternoon and then take them down on Monday for those 3 weekends at a cost of $300 per weekend.
What about the cost we've already incurred, Roger?
Okay, so I'll go back up to that, since I already got to those 3 meets. I think we should do that. So then I had asked the city to put out the variable message signs. We've had them out there. If we go through the rest of this week, it would be 4 weeks, 1 sign every week, and part of that time there might have been 2 signs, northbound and southbound. And as I said before, if you rent a sign, just say $100 a day, that's $700 a week, that's $1,400 if you have to rent a sign. The city has indicated they'd be tickled to death to be reimbursed $500 a week for both signs over those 4 weeks. So I was going to ask the board to consider reimbursing the city for those and thank them for a willingness to share equipment that they had and could put out there. Just think the extra effort these days until the trains are running a little bit more and we finish the rest of the evaluation is exactly what this RTSD is all about. Heaven forbid that we would have a fatality out there somewhere.
So moved.
Yeah.
Second.
Just one question, Roger. Did they share with you how many youth will be participating? Are we talking 50, 250? Every
You know,
life is important.
They did. I will have to dig that information out and send that. It's a huge number. It's not 25 or 50. It's in the hundreds is my recollection. But Isaac Walton has been really good about trying to send us information and help us make good decisions here too. And so I've got an email somewhere with that information. I'll get it back to you, Deb.
No, I think they were wise to call our attention to this and get us in front of this rather than just letting it happen and see how it went. So we have a motion and a second to approve, as I understand it, and Roy, correct me if I'm wrong, $2,000 in reimbursement for the time the
Yep.
signs have already been out there. And did you also authorize the placement of signs
Yeah.
for the 3
The 3
times?
weekends, yeah.
Which I think's wise. So
Yep.
a motion and a second to place those signs, and our thanks to the city. Please call the roll.
Yes.
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 All right then, were we going to skip item D, or did you think we should give attention to that?
I can give you a quick update. We are about 2 months into trains operating along the Highway 2 corridor. We're about 6.5 months since the announcement. We had a little bit, I think, of a communication glitch. We always, they advertised approximately 1 train a day. That's a train down, a train back. There have been times when there's been no trains, and then on some days there's been several trains gone. So an average means an average, not exactly. And we also were not anticipating that there would be training trains and compacting trains run in late December. So we kind of got a number of folks upset and excited when trains started running there. But we've been running those 2 months. We also had, I think of us as one big team, the railroad, both OPPD and BNSF had some signal equipment issues at 40th Street, 48th Street, 56th Street, some gates down. I know some people were frustrated. I think they responded reasonably timely and have stuck with that, and I'm not seeing that we've had problems. It can get worse when we have snow and rain, but I think they've done pretty well. My calculation in January for those 31 days, there were 22 trains. That would be 44 train trips. And I actually started counting the trains in February. 28 days in February, we had 40 train trips. So that's about 1.4 trains per day if you're into numbers. But again, there are days when there can be 2 or 3 trains going down and then several days of nothing. So I want people to realize we didn't say it was going to be 1 train down and 1 train back every single day. That's kind of how it averages out. I think things have been going fairly well. Certainly, I've had a number of calls, and I have been tracking. I was going to make a smart aleck joke. Excel spreadsheet is green on the screen, so I use green engineering sheet to come up with tracking the calls. So this is just a summary. In August, I received, and these are emails or phone calls that I received directly or that came from one of you, from the mayor's office, from other council members or other county commissioners, or just the general public. Anything that came, I tried to respond back. There were 7 in August, 1 in September, 3 in October, 4 in November. December was 15, but that, again, was about that last half of December when the training train started running and people were saying, hey, what's going on? We didn't think things were going to start till January 1. And then 10 in January, 13 in February. I've already had 8 in March, the last couple of days. Things have kind of so I sent this to all the board members. I just wanted you to know that I am tracking those. I'm trying to respond to every single email, letting them know that today you would be meeting and talking about a possible quiet zone. I should say that, while not in the majority, there were a couple people that emailed in and said, don't do a quiet zone. We like the trains. We like the horns. But the majority of the contacts certainly were concerned about the noise. Significant number of them in Village Meadows, probably is the Village Meadows, Briarhurst West, in those areas. So I think things are going fairly well from the railroad standpoint, and open up to discussion with you guys on.
Said we would discuss this further at this meeting, Jane.
Yes. Roger, I want to thank you very much. Honest. Every time an email popped up and I was getting ready to respond, boom, you had responded to them already. So
Amen.
Thank you very, very much for your timely response. And I know many of us probably got the email from Jamie and Melissa Dodge and saw the great lengths that they went to reach out to Village Meadows and get their input. And so they had 164 respondents to the very methodical research and survey that they sent out that demonstrates that there are real concerns. And I think the complaints are really not during the daytime hours. I mean, people are off with their work or they're businesses, you name it, school. It's not that, but it's during the nighttime hours that are essentially pretty problematic. And I can tell you this morning, I heard them at 3:55 a.m. this morning. And as I was coming into our meeting, they were coming back at 10:55. So, I mean, they're keeping to a good schedule, but the early morning and overnight hours are what we're hearing the most. At least I'm hearing the most complaints, and I'm sure you're all getting an earful on that. And I wondered if Roger, if you could just review again, what is the cost of doing the quiet zone feasibility study? What are we looking at? And I was looking at the budget. Doesn't look like we have any placeholder for something like that.
Maybe not, maybe so.
Okay.
Always hide a little in a pocket somewhere. I guess if it was the direction and the desire of this board to do a quiet zone feasibility study, I guess what I would suggest or recommend to the board is that we try to do what I would call a very high level study, more of a desktop, using the maps, the information we have, try not to spend money we don't need to spend. And I think the study would really focus on two things. One is at each crossing from Calvert Street all the way to Yankee Hill, I think that's 11 crossings, 11 public crossings, there's 2 privates in there. That's in the city limits. That we would ask a qualified firm to analyze the minimum amount of equipment, signage, markings, or technology that would have to be placed at each of those crossings to be able to do a quiet zone. And then the second part of that would be, just like I have Google Earth up here right now, and I talked to a couple of folks last night, and they said, well, just do Pine Lake Road. That horn is right there close to my house, just do that one. Well, but 70th Street isn't very far away, and when the trains are coming the other way, is the noise going to be the same? So a second part of the study that I would suggest is, and there's technology out there to do that, is we would lay the train horn noise contours on a map on top of each crossing to show how far those noises go, the horn noise goes at the different decibels, both up and down the track and lateral from the track as well, out into the neighborhoods. So we'd have a cost, and then we'd have maybe a tool to say, are there some cross-section, or are there some at-grade crossings that you wouldn't need to do, or are there some you could do and get a lot of benefit and not necessarily have to do them all? Or if you need to do them all, you've got some cost perhaps, and is there a way to phase that? But until we actually have the cost numbers and that information, otherwise it's pretty speculative. Jane, I am only dangerous. I understand a lot of the things that need to be there, and I can give you order of magnitude numbers and costs, but until we actually sit down and figure some of that out, and someone like FHU, as Larry said, is much more specialized in that. They're capable of doing that and estimating what those costs would be, and then we could come back to the board and analyze that. I guess the other thing, if the board would approve that, I guess the other thing that costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time is public involvement. And I would suggest in this beginning part, we don't do any public involvement. Let's get the information, and then the board can decide where do we go or what do we do with that information. My intent isn't to cut anybody out, but till you have the costs and you look at the impacts, you don't really know exactly what you want to do. Then once you decide what to do, then you can start gathering input from the public. So that would be my thoughts if the board wanted to intervene.
Well, we've got Deb next, and then I've got Roy following her. So.
Roger, I know we've had some bad experiences with wayside horns and that you're not a fan of them.
Big
But when
sigh.
you talk about that study, would it be with regular horns and then also with wayside so we could see the comparison?
So when you say regular horns, I mean, a regular quiet zone, there are no horns, just the gates and lights, the bells.
You talked about like a horned circle, so you'd know how many houses were impacted.
By the locomotive horn.
Right. But would the study also tell us if we put a wayside horn in, how many houses would be impacted and the differential?
I'll give you a qualified yes. I think
Okay.
the first step in analyzing what would be required to make a quiet zone, the consultant would analyze, can they do it with gates, lights, and medians? Or if they can't, then maybe a wayside horn. And I think the contour, the noise contour for a wayside horn could also be laid in that same area and analyzed.
Okay, great.
Very good. Roy?
So with what you're proposing, do you have a number of dollars in mind?
I do.
Could you share that?
Great.
But yes, I think we need to try to do this for something less than $100,000, and maybe even a fair bit less than that. But if after your discussion, if you're wanting to move ahead, I'll give you a proposed motion for consideration.
Okay. Jane?
So, Roger, you said this is going to be a high-level study, and you, number one, analyze minimal amount to equip, and which you listed the items possibly. But when they do that study, would they identify out of those 11 public crossings, okay, out of those 11 public crossings, 8 of them can be done with the minimal amount of gates, bells, and stuff like that, but then we have these 4 crossings that would require,
Millions.
yes, or,
Okay.
yeah,
Let me
in that high-level study, is that included? Like, these are
Yes.
the number that can be done with minimal amount, but these are the ones that would take considerable more.
Let me back up for a minute and redefine what I meant by minimal.
Okay.
Instead of sending a survey crew out and measuring and shooting and marking and taking pictures of every sign, gate, marking, median, you do all that in your office with aerial photographs and the drawings that you already have. So it's a desktop exercise. By that, so the minimal is minimal survey and sending people out to do stuff. Every crossing must have a minimum amount of safety equipment at the crossing to qualify. So it could be a wayside horn, it could be 2 gates and a median, it could be 4 gates and no median. So each intersection, I think the consultant would say, if you're going to make this a quiet zone, here is the equipment you must put in for that, and here's the cost. Or if you put in a wayside horn, here might be the cost. So I think we would be able to know maybe where you were leading, as I had said before, a crossing that's already got gates and lights and a median, you don't have to put much more in there. But if it doesn't have constant warning circuitry along the railroad track, that's $250,000 by itself. If you don't have gates and lights and a median or circuitry, now you're probably $500,000. Some of them have some of those or parts, so it would be identifying what is needed at each one and the approximate cost for each one.
And then can I ask a follow-up? On the horn contours, is that something that they can do sitting at their desk based on engineering studies show that sound goes X amount of feet? Is that something they can do? Or do they want to come to my house and just,
I think they would do that
Set
with
up monitoring?
engineering studies and standard practice, we know how noise travels, and then they would take into account such things as the elevation changes in the ground,
Okay.
trees and other buildings, things like that. I think they can do that without going out to people's houses and measuring it. Because again, it's going to be a range. We're not talking a few feet. It's a matter of, well, at 70 decibels, you're going to still be out there a quarter to a half a mile. Some of those kind of numbers. It's not a few feet.
One thing, Roger, that's been proposed is that maybe not all the 11 crossings need to be in the quiet zone. And is this something this study would give us an idea on, that maybe we don't need to include certain of the 11?
I guess I would be assuming that's what the noise contours would show us. We'd be looking at a map and say, this crossing is affected here, and this one is here. If you've got crossings that way overlap, so you don't do this one, but it still affects everybody downstream. So
Yeah,
I think
so-
the noise contours would help make decisions on where and how many of the crossings would be appropriate to do if you moved ahead.
Oh, good.
And then, Roger, would they also identify the number of households in that particular area? I guess that would be helpful too, but I don't know, what would they do?
I
They
think on the-
identify where a circle of sound can travel, but do they identify the number of households in that circle?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I'm going to suggest that with aerial photography, and I've got Google Earth here, you put a noise contour on there. You don't have to be a rocket science to kind of get an idea of how many homes
Yep.
there might be in an area, or at least what neighborhoods are affected. There's more density up here west of 56th Street in that Tierra area.
And it
To
could be
hold
just,
down the cost, I wasn't expecting they would count the households. They would show us the neighborhoods and the footprint and kind of leave it then back up to us. And if you were going to do something, deciding which ones to do might be part of a second step of a study with public involvement on what you would do, where you would do it, or if you would do it.
This would be kind of the opening step to give us a rough idea of the impact and what
Yeah.
it would potentially
I
cost.
think the intent of this study, everybody's saying it's cost too much. Well, how much does it cost? Trying to get that information for you to be able to look at and say, is it too much? Or is that something we can do? Is it, as you said, if you didn't do them all, is there, one of the residents I talked to last night said, well, I suggested my place because it'd be a good place to start. You can do ours first, and then move up or
Imagine.
down. But,
That logic's
course.
infallible.
yeah.
All right, would
well,
we,
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the high-level study on a quiet zone for the 11 public crossings.
Would
Second.
you entertain allowing me to make a more specific motion
Sure.
to make sure that there are some things in there that, in order to move ahead with this, I think we need to be timely. Be less than $100,000 would be the goal. The motion would be that you would authorize the board president and the executive director to go through a selection process, select a consultant, define a scope of work, and negotiate a contract or an agreement to do that work, and that it needs to be less than $100,000. And you'd be authorizing us to sign that agreement if it met that criteria.
does that meet with your approval, Jane?
Well, so Roger, you're saying it's the agreement and then the study itself, correct?
Well, you have to have an agreement with the consultant, so we're hiring a consultant to do the study.
Okay, perfect,
And-
yes,
And
of
the
course.
agreement with
Thank
the
you.
consultant would be $100,000 or
Of not to
less.
exceed $100,000 for the study that they're
For the
going to
study.
complete. Perfect.
And by,
Person taking the minutes, have that motion then? Are we good to go here? Okay, so then we are in agreement that we have a motion. Deb, your second
Yes,
stands,
yes,
so.
I agree with that. With one request, would you notify the entire board when the agreement is signed and kind of give us a timeline? So, or will it not, said agreement not be in final form prior to our next meeting on June 7th?
oh, I would certainly hope that we'd have an agreement prior to there and have a significant amount of work done to report at the next meeting. And absolutely, just as that board order requires, I'd need to bring back and give you the details. But we'll share the details with which firm is selected. And I do want to remind folks, that's not just an easy effort either in deciding how to go through a request for proposals, selecting somebody, then getting the scope put together, negotiating the fee. But we would share all of that.
Just because we have received so many requests,
Right.
and it would be nice to have
Right.
that information to share with constituents when
I
they're
can
reaching out
see
to us.
why that would be important to the members to know the rate of progress we're making, so that seems appropriate, yeah. All right, any further? Yes, Jane?
I just have one more question of Roger. Roger, you know how we were talking about the risk assessment at 33rd and Cornhusker? Is there any way that you could come back and share with us, what is the risk assessment for all these 11 public crossings and the volume of traffic that we see on each one of these crossings? Because we know growth has really gone south and southeast. And so, I mean, it would be helpful to know that volume of traffic. I know I have the study here that was done by LTU, but doesn't give me the detailed number of, or, you know, the risk dial on that, like we've done for 33rd and Cornhusker. I think that would be helpful to put it in perspective.
I just finished participating in a research project with the University of Nebraska Engineering and NDOT, and they have updated the formula for risk factor evaluation of at-grade crossings across the whole state. The state is now in the process of pulling that information together so that perhaps that information can be used to measure the risk of a potential crash or fatality at a crossing. And so I doubt that is going to be available right now. What I would tell you is just doing a quiet zone doesn't necessarily increase the safety unless the crossing doesn't have gates or lights or medians.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these crossings do. Calvert doesn't, but Pioneers does, 14th does, 27th does. Southwood does not have medians, but it has gates and lights. Then the rest of them out to 70th Street have gates, lights, and medians. 70th Street doesn't have a median. So for most of those, when the gates and lights come down, the risk is people's poor behavior, choosing to try to beat that or go around it. So creating a quiet zone doesn't necessarily improve the safety. And in fact, one of the reasons the railroads don't participate is they don't think the quiet zone is as safe because they think the horn really helps. So if there's already gates and lights and medians there and now you're taking away the horn, so safety can be somewhat subjective to who you are. So
I was just curious how it compares to 33rd and Cornhusker, where we know they have some gates and other standard safety devices in place.
Just caution us to mix and match issues here, because, you know, a quiet zone is strictly for
The resident.
alleviating the sounding of
Right.
locomotive horns as they approach the crossings. And
the risk
not-
factors,
yeah.
all that should be used by the road agencies to determine whether or not there needs to be more safety appurtenances put out there, not necessarily evaluate the horn. But
we already.
Yes,
we
and
can
I
do
understand
that.
that, but I just want to kind of further define the level of urgency,
well,
if
okay.
any, on how we approach this, because it's something new for all of us, with the trains not having been activated for more than 17 years. Obviously, the risk was probably zilch when it was no trains are running. I get that, but now, because of the volume of traffic that is on these 11 public crossings, you know, what is the risk as it compared to 33rd and Cornhusker? Is the traffic greater on all the different crossings on 33rd? Just to give us a
So we-
benchmark.
Bottom line, we have a request
Yes.
for, if it can be determined, the risk factor of the trains running on this crossing.
Right.
Fair enough. I think
We have a
we have a
motion.
motion and a second, and we should vote on that.
Yes.
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 Very good. Anything else on that item, Roger?
I guess I may end up doing an interview here. I guess the one thing I would hope is that we can effectively communicate out to all those folks that have sent in requests or called that the board has approved a feasibility study, and we'll be working on that. I don't have a schedule yet. So we want to try to get that communicated back out so that we don't continue to just get tons of
Right.
emails
Right.
in. It's easy for miscommunication to happen, so
We have Riley Johnson in the background typing furiously, so another opportunity to get the word out.
all right, and I guess just along those lines again, to make sure that we sometimes don't communicate correctly, at the Commons meeting in August, I said, and I was quoted, because I went back and looked and listened, that the railroad was willing to run trains in the evening after rush and back in the morning, and Riley wrote that in the paper, and I got called on that. I went back and researched, and what I determined was I was convinced at the time that I could get the railroad to consider doing that. They adamantly said, no, we don't run on schedules, and you can see that now. They are not running on schedules. So and I answered back to a number of people admitting that I overstated the case. And so we want to keep trying that communication. It's also been said approximately one train a day, and we say one trip down, one trip back. That doesn't mean on any one day there isn't going to be more than one train on a given day, and other days there won't be any. It's an average over that time. So again, they could be coming at any time, day or night, more than one in a day, some days not at all. So, and I guess nothing else, I just would beg people to be careful, slow down, look, listen, live. We don't want anyone hurt. And I know the railroads don't either. So,
Very good. Is that item 10 then that you just addressed with?
yeah, I guess again, I would just say I have tracked all of the communications coming in. I'm putting those emails and my responses in a separate file folder so that we'll have them in case anybody questions. The goal is to try to be responsive to everyone. I make sure that they know we're getting back to them, so.
I would just echo the previous comments. Thank you so much for your efforts in this. I know the emails can at times be overwhelming. People need to be heard, and your responses give them that assurance that we are listening, so thank you. Moving on to item number 11, non-agenda items, public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to make a public comment at this time? Seeing none, any further business that we'd like to address?
I will move we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and seconds to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Short. Yes. Vest.
Yes.
Emerson.
Yes.
Bauer.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
And Rickles.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Our next meeting will be held on June 7th, 2021 at 11 a.m. Thank you all for being here this morning.